Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast, taking care of business today with Peter Menzies, who is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, former newspaper executive, and past vice chair of the CRTC. Thanks for joining us today, Peter.
Hey, Mario, thanks for having me. Thanks for your interest.
All right. And before we get into it, full disclosure, Peter was once my boss at the Calgary Herald. All right. So we're going to talk, Peter, of a recent piece that you published called "It's the End of an Era for News." The industry can either adapt or die. And so tell me where you see the industry right now, the news industry in Canada.
Well, it's going through a massive transition. In the invention of the internet, particularly, the World Wide Web by Sir Tim Berners-Lee around 1993 is really, I think this is what people are having difficulty coming to grips with. This is as significant a technological change in the way we communicate with each other as was the invention of the printing press about 600 years ago. It really shifts everything. It takes away certain monopoly constructs. Newspapers used to have quasi-monopolies in their markets. I mean, the most Calgary could hold was two dailies, and that was contentious at the time because you needed a $50 million printing press to be in the business, right?
Yeah.
So the cost of entry was very high. With the World Wide Web, suddenly every realtor, car dealer, sports franchise, they all had their own media, and they didn't need the old media. So one world is dying and another one is about to be born.
So where, when you look at the newspaper world, let's talk just first of all about newspapers. Is it going to be there for forever, or do we see the end of newspapers coming at some point? Print newspapers.
Yeah, I can't see any future at all for print newspapers. I mean, I can see a future in which there is a print product by somebody that comes out on the weekends. Like my Globe and Mail subscription these days, for instance, is like online only. But on Saturday, I get the print version for those people who still like it. But it'll be a small number of people. The press runs, I mean, frankly, the press runs at those newspapers that still exist are pretty small these days. So it's moving in that direction. It's an online world. It's not even an over-the-air world anymore. It's everything will be centered on the internet.
So what do we? Well, not we, but what is the media? Still in that world in some ways, but what does the media have to do? The mainstream media have to do to survive?
Oh, well, they need to completely change their structures. I mean, one of the reasons why I think it's difficult for newspapers to survive is that they were built on highly profitable foundations, where they made a lot of money, right? So they could hire a lot of people, and it fell apart very quickly for them. These things aren't easy in terms of that. But their internal infrastructures, I mean, all their liabilities in terms of pension costs, the collective bargaining agreements, the hours that people work, and that sort of stuff, all of those aren't appropriate for the type of flexibility and innovation that you need these days. And I don't say that, to imply that people shouldn't be well paid and have good benefits and vacations and that sort of stuff, but you need to recreate the whole thing. So I really see it as one world is going to have to, large parts anyway, some will survive, but large parts of one world are really going to have to die to be reborn as something new. And I think the thing we have to remember is that what's important is that journalism survives, not necessarily the horse that it rides.
Mm-hmm. When you look at newspapers specifically, Peter, is there room for two newspapers today in one city, owned by the
No,
same company?
no. Well, I mean, it's pointless, right? I mean, right now you've got a kind of construct with Post Media where, I mean, the only difference between the Calgary Sun and the Calgary Herald that I can see in terms of content is Rick Bell writes for one and Don Braid writes for the other. And that allows them to probably
Mhm.
feel that fulfill their obligations to the Competition Bureau when it allowed the
Yeah,
Post Media to take over Sun Media, which was very
yeah.
contentious.
Yeah. So when you're looking at the, I guess, the decline of the mainstream media out there, what does that do, or what is the impact on local news coverage?
Well, it's been very, very devastating, right? I mean, when you think about it, 30, 40 years ago, Calgary City Hall would have had, I don't know, 8, 10 reporters regularly covering on it. All the TV stations had a beat down there. I think the Calgary Herald had probably 2 reporters and 1 full-time columnist
Hmm.
covering City Hall. That would have been in a city half the size that the city is today. So
Hmm.
you don't have people there. I mean, but there are. I mean, one of the things I think we need to focus on is it's not just the destruction. It's the construction of new outlets. I mean, Livewire Calgary does cover City Hall, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody leaves uh, a gap, or a vacuum, somebody will fill it. And
Yeah.
I think so. The focus we need to have is on filling those gaps, understanding that this construct can't fulfill that purpose anymore. What construct can? Maybe Livewire is it, maybe it isn't, but I mean, it's at least somebody's doing it, and that's where I go to now for City Hall coverage.
And is that where the opportunity is in the media world now? And we, you mentioned Livewire, but on a national scale, say we've got, say, Rebel News. We've got, out here in Alberta, the Western Standard. And then there's a bunch of niche publications that are jumping in. Is that the future? Is that the future of journalism?
I don't know exactly what the future was. If I did, I wouldn't be telling you for free. I'd be selling it to somebody. But I think there's going to be a period of innovation, and I think all of those are part of it. I mean, there's Canada Land, which leans to the left by Jesse Brown. There's the Line. There's the Hub. The Line is more commentary. There's the Hub, which is focused on public policy. There's the Logic. There's Western Standard. There's all kinds of. There's actually, everybody talks about all the newspapers that have died. There's like 200 startups, innovators, and that sort of stuff. There's the Narwhal, which focuses on environmental issues, right?
Yeah.
It's for the environmental crowd. I think so. There's lots of niches being filled, and with some success. And maybe that is what the future looks like. Maybe instead of having one aggregator of today's news, I'm going to have to live in a world where I'm getting 3 or 4, I'm going to narrow it down to my 3 or 4 favorites, and I get some news. I think the risk there is that we all end up living in a world where we're just getting our own opinions reinforced
Yeah.
and not being exposed to other new ideas.
Yeah. Now, Peter, switching gears a little bit, but I want to get your thoughts on CBC. Now, CBC is under quite a lot of attack in recent years. A lot of campaigns out there to defund the CBC. Where do you think that entity is headed?
For change, I think it's inevitable. I mean, the even the current Liberal government, Minister Pascal Saint announced the other day she's going to have a panel looking into the CBC. There's a lot of pressure. There always was from broadcasters, but now it is from people in the old print industry, or the text industry, I guess we can call them, saying CBC needs to get out of the advertising business. It's the biggest competitor for online advertising right now, which is more and more scarce as the big tech companies create better and better methods of advertising,
Hmm.
and that sort of stuff. So, in my view, nothing can be fixed. We can't really have a good, safe, secure future for journalism in Canada until we deal with the issue of the CBC. You can't you. I mean, imagine the real estate industry or the furniture industry or any other industry in which one large player is getting a $1 billion plus subsidy from the government,
Yeah.
right? Nobody'd be able to compete with that.
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't, especially as the world's all going online and that sort of stuff. So you got to figure that out. You could have the subsidy, but you can't be subsidizing a commercial competitor. I mean, I think there's a role for a public broadcaster in a country this size. I have no problem with that. But what we have right now with the CBC is that it's a public broadcaster and it's a publicly funded commercial news and entertainment operation. It is not a public broadcaster. So if we get it back to being a purely public broadcaster, we might have a chance.
Now, one of the issues, obviously, with CBC and other mainstream media over the years has been the issue of independence, bias, especially the bias part of it. You see so many people upset about the bias in the mainstream media today, and that's why they're turning to the Rebel News and the Western standards of the world. Is it worse today than it was, say, when we were hanging around newsrooms?
Yeah, I think part of that is that there isn't as much self-correction as there used to be in the newsroom. I mean, I mean, I think it's generally conceded that newsrooms, most journalists in most newsrooms, I mean, they all have arts degrees, right? I mean, the general trend is that they will lean to the left of center, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. You just have to, whatever you are, whether you lean to the right or whether you lean to the left, you need to be aware of it and work to produce, copy that doesn't betray a bias, right? In the old newsroom where you had a blend of people, there might be some guy who'd take a look at a piece of copy, Menzies filed, and sort of go, "No, come on, Menzies, you can't say that, right? You got to get somebody else doing this. You're going way over you're going too far with that sort of stuff." The problem with these niche ones is that everybody in the newsroom maybe thinks along the same lines. If you're a right-wing news organization, everybody's kind of agreeing with each other. If you're left-wing, everybody's kind of agreeing with each other, and there isn't somebody there to raise their hand the way Joe Vilovitsky used to do and say, "No, this is not right." And people would look at it and say, "He's got a point."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What about the online legislation? I wanted to ask you that before we leave today. What impact is that having out there?
The Online News Act?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's been really devastatingly bad. It is the most horrible of horrible legislation that you can imagine, right? So at the end of the day, they've managed to squeeze $100 million out of Google, which is, I don't know, I've seen estimates that they were already spending 50 million. I don't think it's that high, but it was probably at least 25, right? So all you've got is about $75 million of incremental revenue. Put that in context. I mean, the Calgary Sun and the Calgary Herald together 25 years ago probably brought in about $220 million a year in revenue, right? So that 75 million, you put that is net, plus then you have to subtract the 18 million that Meta Facebook was spending, plus the value that they claim. It might not be that high. They claim that they gave $230 million worth of value to the news industry. But even if you cut that in half, the industry's worse off now than it was before. I have never seen a piece of public policy legislation that, well, maybe the national energy policy in the early 1980s
yeah,
might have been the only one I can think of that actually made things worse when it was trying to make things better.
yeah. Now, Peter, as an old-time journalist and person involved in the news media, when you look at today and you look back, what are your thoughts, emotions about an industry like all of us? This was in our blood when we got into it.
Well, I think it's sad. I mean, I've been out of it for a long time, so it's not as sad as if I was still there.
Yeah,
I can't imagine how painful it would be to still be there, to be honest, in terms of that. And I had coffee with another old newspaper veteran the other day, and they still said, we had a lot of good times, right? I mean, and we did, and it was a lot of fun for a long time, but then it ended, right? I mean,
yeah,
it was fun being a horse and carriage driver, I'm sure, for a long time too, and then it ended, right? I don't think any of us could have imagined. I remember when I went into the business, I thought, well, every town has a newspaper. There'll always be a newspaper, right?
yeah,
We'll always have a job, right? There's always you can move anywhere, right? And get a job and that sort of stuff. And anyway, a boom, right? It's just whoosh, gone.
yeah, exactly.
It's
Well,
sad.
thanks.
It's sad, but it's you got to deal with it, and you got to move forward. There's no point in dwelling on the past.
And that's the state, I guess, the media is in right now, right? They got to
Yep.
look
Got to
forward.
look forward, and public policy needs to try to build a path forward. We don't have time. We don't have time. I mean, you and I and some other old hacks can get together from time to time and reminisce and use it that. But as an industry and as a business, we don't have time for that. People have to move forward and get it done.
All right, super. Thanks, Peter, for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Mario. And you were a model employee, by the way.
Oh, thank you. All right, that was Peter Menzies, Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, a former newspaper executive and past Vice Chair of CRTC. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Managing Editor of Canada's podcast, Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us today.